Welcome to How to Fix It. I'm John Avlon, author, historian, journalist, and the purpose of this podcast is to focus on finding solutions to the problems we face, not just endlessly fixating on the problems themselves. And sometimes what we need most is perspective on our problems, and that is what history provides. And there is no greater teacher for modern Americans about our history, not just the U.S., but us, than Ken Burns, legendary documentary filmmaker. For decades now, has chronicled every aspect of our nation and keeps finding new layers to unpeel. Ken, welcome to How to Fix It.
Great to be with you, John.
Ken, you've taken on the big kahuna on this one. This is the bookend to where many Americans first met you with your multi-series documentary on the Civil War, coming out, of course, right in advance of our 250th birthday. But the state of American politics has dampened American patriotism for many people. We see the flag being used as a partisan signifier. Tell us what the story of the American Revolution, as you have retold it, can do to help us reunite as a nation.
Well, I think inherent in your description of what this podcast is about is the problem. We spend a lot of time describing these things. We spend a lot of time arguing. The novelist Richard Powers said the best arguments in the world won't change anybody's point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story. It has that ability not to sort of have as its objective that thou shall do this or thou shall not do that. But it's like a benevolent Trojan horse that you receive, and then it sort of transforms by the way it enters. It doesn't burn down the city. It doesn't murder its inhabitants. It transforms. And I think a good story, particularly now about our origin, is the healthy thing to do. When we're so divided. Well, we're way more divided during our revolution. So first of all, you can get rid of the Chicken Little sky is falling bit. It doesn't help one little bit. And that you can also begin to understand the extraordinary circumstances that came together to create us, both U.S. and us, and then be inspired by one of the most important events in all of world history. I said it's the most important event since the birth of Christ. And I did that as much, not to be provocative, but to ask people to go into themselves and begin to think, well, no. I met a French woman the other day who said, no, it's the French Revolution. And I said, well, how did that work out? And then somebody said the Renaissance. I said, oh, that's a really good alternative, but let's have a conversation. But more importantly, our revolution is sort of drowning in fife and drum treacle. It's sentimentalized, it's romanticized. The barnacles of sentimentality are encrusted throughout. It's superficial. It seems to suggest that it's not a war. It's sort of some good guys who think up these new ideas, and they're opposed by the people that they used to be part of Britain, not acknowledging that it's a very bloody revolution. It's a civil war superimposed on that. And it's a global war, the fourth global war for the prize of North America. And when you say prize of North America, you're saying the land. And that land also happens to have been occupied for thousands of years by other people. So you have already a very, very complex dynamic going on. The fact that you've imported 500,000 enslaved Africans, and many are also freed in the colonies. And women are a significant player in this story. And you have these global powers vying for it, not just Britain, but France, who will become our ally, Spain, who will become our ally, the Netherlands, who will become our ally. And our American Revolution is fought not just in the 13 colonies, but in Florida and in the Caribbean and in the subcontinent of India, around England and off the coast of France and in Southeast Asia. This is like what people are saying, and that it isn't just the bold-faced names that we know who are now so opaque that they become kind of cartoonish. So we've spent 10 years trying to figure out how to remove a little bit of that opacity. And then more importantly, to introduce you to scores of other people that I had never heard of. And I presume most people have never heard of, who are part of this incredibly dynamic story that in no way diminishes the big ideas in Philadelphia. In fact, I think makes them much more inspirational in the telling, calling the balls and strikes and telling the more complete story.
I agree with you, obviously, but the pulling the aperture back as you just did, that's where the revelations come in, and the layers you're exposing, the stories, the unsung heroes. And that's one, actually, you anticipated one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which is, the earliest days of our nation are more diverse than the narrative, even if in embryo. And tell folks a little bit more about the notable Black Americans and Native Americans and the contributions they made as individuals who'd been otherwise written out of our history, perhaps
I
whitewashed.
had an interview the other day with somebody who wanted to say, isn't it better to go back to the original heritage stuff, this blood and soil? And you go, okay, so that's an entirely Native American story, right?
Interesting.
And in fact, the idea for union of the colonies came to Benjamin Franklin from his studying of the Iroquois Confederacy, which had been in place for, many centuries, which was 5 and then 6 nations called the Haudenosaunee, which was, these native people were various nations, not them. They've been world players for a long time, trading diplomatic partners. They know who the Spanish were. They know who the French were. They dealt with the Dutch. They'd had complex relationships, and they'd figure out a way to run their own affairs. And one of their spokesmen, Conestoga, said, you white people don't think we know the value of our land. You're wrong. And then said, we've created this thing. We're a powerful confederacy. Never fall out one with another if you're going to try this. And it's an admonition from the very opening moments of our film to center not, this is not a Native American story. It's a complex story. The 13 colonies are overlaid over what were the homelands of many different tribes. Those people have either migrated out, they've either assimilated, or they've either learned how to coexist. So an American city like Philadelphia, there are going to be many different tribes walking through the streets. They're going to be free and enslaved because slavery is legal from New Hampshire to Georgia. Human beings. Women are a dynamic part of this. And then you're going to have this new, vibrant colony kind of 3,000 miles away from the parents. It's like what happens when your parents leave for a while and you get to have a party. So what do? You finally own land for the first time ever in your life, right? Your family has been in England or Wales or Scotland or Ireland dependent for 1,000 years, and now you own land. And in the previous global war, what we call the French and Indian War, which everyone else on earth calls the 7 Years' War, Britain, be careful what you wish for, ends up winning and has the most far-flung empire on earth and has a depleted treasury, depleted army, and doesn't know how to protect those colonists who want to pour over and take Indian land to the west. And so they draw a line of demarcation in 1763, and it just enrages ordinary folks and the big speculators like Washington and Franklin, who are dealing in tens of thousands of acres. So you've got land, and then they begin to say, well, maybe we can get the colonies to pay for their own protection. So then you have the issue of taxes and representation, and you begin this, what begins as a struggle between British citizens over Indian land and taxes and representation becomes this bloody world war that would somehow engage some of the noblest aspirations of humankind. And I just love, that's our topic sentence. And that is the whole ball of wax there. Like that out of this, all of a sudden this clash, it's not just British rights, it becomes universal rights, as the historian Christopher Brown says. And when you do that, you've just opened a big door. You may mean only white men are property free of debt when you said all men are created equal, but you said the word all. And as Yuval Levin says, that all is going to break down lots of barriers. Slavery's over at that moment. It's going to take 69 years, but it's over. And women are going to get the vote, even though it's an outrageous and inexcusable 144 years, but it's over once you articulate these things. And these words are not heard by just George Washington and John Adams. They are heard by people at the margins, as Maggie Blackhawk, the legal scholar, says. So Native Americans and enslaved Black people and free Black people and women are hearing these and are being transformed. The idea of liberty is contagious. And that's a huge unintended part of this story. And these guys never meant it. They wanted to be a kind of aristocracy, what we, call and dismiss today the elites, right? But in order to win this war, they have to engage teenagers and ne'er-do-wells and felons and, second and third sons without the chance of an inheritance and recent immigrants with no property. And they're going to win the war. And so they have to be given something. So democracy is not an object, but a consequence of this event.
That's a fascinating distinction. And the fact it's built upon the model of the Iroquois Confederation is a story that we should tell ourselves more.
Yeah, it's a great story. Great story. And Franklin goes, wow, why can't we do this? He assembles 7 of the 13 colonies in Albany. They immediately pass his plan of union. He's advertised it with a cut up snake under the dire, over the dire warning, join or die. Everybody says yes. And then they go home to try to sell it, in this mid 1750s. And nobody wants to give up their autonomy. It's like it dies. But join or die becomes a war cry 20 years later. And we have that impulse to come together, to figure out how we might represent our interests as diverse as they are. And I mean, the difference between a Georgian and a New Hampshireite is like the difference between a Prussian and a French, maybe even more.
Join or die, my favorite flag still, I think timely. And also a reminder that timing is everything. Franklin was a little too early in that iteration.
But you know what? Maybe that's the way it is. You plant the seeds and it percolates for a while. And you need that 20 years of lead up, including the last 10 years of resistance, which, Sam Adams, a failure as a brewer, is really great propagandist who says his job is to keep my fellow colonists alive to their grievances. Sound familiar? When the British cave on something and everybody goes, oh, it's all over. The Sons of Liberty are disbanding. He's going, no, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And and Edmund Burke has a great comment in which it's like, the colonists think we're meant to do this. We think they're meant to do this. We can't find a way to retreat. They can't find a way to retreat. Who knows what's going to happen? And you begin to see the rhetoric as almost accidental moving towards revolution just because of that escalating rhetoric. As we know as kids, when you fight with your brother, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, and then all of a sudden.
The oldest story in the world. Coming out of this, who are some of your favorite unsung or undersung heroes of the American Revolution? Not the bold-faced names in your 7th grade history.
There are a lot of bold-faced names or B-list that are pretty interesting. Benedict Arnold makes an appearance at the beginning of our 2nd episode, and it's not till about a third of the way through our 6th and last episode that you go, uh-oh. And up until that time, he's the hero. He's the Hannibal that goes to Quebec. He's the hero of Saratoga, the turning point of the war, our defeat and the surrender, forcing the surrender of a British army. Burgoyne's army at Saratoga is what convinces the French to come in, and that makes all the difference in the world. We found in just following just trails and footnotes in books, we found a kid named John Greenwood who's 14 years old, who joins the Patriot cause after Lexington and Concord and fights through Trenton. Down in Connecticut, there's a 15-year-old, Joseph Plum Martin, who's sort of the epitome of the teenage grunt. He joins up a few days after the Declaration and fights to the end of the war. He's there at Redoubt number 10 at Yorktown. It's being led by Lafayette and Hamilton, but he's the guy going over with black troops from Rhode Island and seeing the man at his right being shot in the head and dying, crying out bitterly, but there was no stopping us, he said. And he goes through the abattis, the sharpened, spiky logs, and they're able to take Redoubt number 10, and the French take Redoubt number 9. A few minutes later, they hole the big guns up, and that's it. It's over.
Suddenly, the world turned upside down.
The world turned upside down. It is. It's so inspiring. I've been working on this for 10 years. People say, aren't you bored? I go, are you kidding me? I'm in grief stricken. The only thing that's keeping me from sobbing is being able to talk to you and other people to say, this is a great story. You have to hear this story.
It is. And I want to highlight the fact you mentioned the black troops from the Rhode Island Regiment. I mean, there are, but I think, 10% of soldiers, I believe, were African-Americans. Native Americans were being recruited on both sides. I mean, it's a more diverse army.
Too. Yeah, it's the hunger for freedom is an intensely personal and local decision. So if the British are offering freedom, slaves are going to go to the British. We think 20,000 enslaved Americans fought 15 for the British, 5,000 for us, the Patriots. Native Americans are making the same kind of decision. The Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, is going to break up over the revolution. Some of the Eastern tribes, more assimilated, closer relationships with us, tend to go with us. The Western tribes think they can forestall what is going to be inevitable by siding with the British, who had defeated the French and seem to be wanting the colonists to stay where they are, not knowing that, of course, everybody wants the continent. We don't call it the Eastern Seaboard Congress, or we don't put George Washington in charge of the Eastern Seaboard Army. It's called the Continental Army. Everybody knows where we're going. Let us not mince words about it. So I like Betsy Ambler, somebody that we found through a footnote, who's this young girl, 10 years old. She's from Yorktown, which is, structurally fun, but she's a refugee. You don't think of Americans being a refugee in their own country. She spends the whole war running around Virginia trying to outrun the British. Her mother have some, nervous breakdown, but also has a daughter. His father says, the only independent daughter I have, because she's born after July 4th. And that daughter, when the revolution's over, says to Betsy, her older sister, who's now 16 after Yorktown, I don't remember much. And so Betsy sits down and writes her sister a kind of memoir. And when you get Maya Hawke, one of, 60 extraordinary actors who read off camera, I think we have the greatest cast that's ever been assembled for any movie or any television show off camera. Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep and Paul Giamatti and Jeff Daniels and Damian Lewis and Sir Kenneth Branagh and Domhnall Gleeson. And I've done maybe a tenth of them. Maya and Ethan Hawke as Anthony Wayne. But Maya it makes Betsy Ambler a real person. And it feels like somebody you can identify with, just like John Greenwood is, just like Joseph Plum Martin is. He could be transported to the Tom Hanks's group in Saving Private Ryan, walking across the field and bitching and moaning about the war. Or some of the grunts we've met in the Civil War or World War I or World War II. It's just the same, or Vietnam. It's just the same complaint of the guys who are doing the heavy slogging and the fighting.
And here I thought you were going to say Horatio Gates.
So do we need to now? Shall we completely dismiss Horatio Gates now?
No. It's. I mean, if you want to add a little color, but an interesting cat.
He's an interesting cat. He's given Philip Schuyler, who everyone now in the universe knows who that is, the father of the Schuyler sisters, is the head of the Northern Department, and something happens and he's replaced with Gates. And Gates is incredibly cautious. Fortunately, Washington has sent up there Daniel Morgan of Virginia, who's fighting general, and Benedict Arnold, who's an even more fighting general. And they basically offset the reticence of Gates. But because Gates is the commanding officer, he's the hero of Saratoga. He gets put in charge of the Southern Department. And at the first battle, Camden, the first shot fires and he gets on his horse and he runs and he does not stop for 150 miles until he reaches Hillsborough, I think, North Carolina. His career's over, and they very fortunately put the most important number 2 general in, which is Nathaniel Greene of Rhode Island, who had been a Quaker and a pacifist, of course, same one and the same thing, but felt that the times demanded he couldn't hold on to this pacifist side. He's really super interesting, Nathaniel Greene.
Yeah, Nathaniel Greene is legit. I was joking about Horatio Gates.
Yeah, I knew you were. And we deserve to send him a little bit farther back into the dust heap of history because you brought him up.
I want to dig into one moment, the Valley Forge scene, which you depict so beautifully, which to me is one of those moments of applied history we all go through individually as a nation through sort of Valley Forge days where we've just got to tough it out. The odds look long. It looks like you're
the Sunshine Patriot and the Summer Soldier. Yeah.
How to Fix It is sponsored by GhostBed. You can't fix big issues if you're running on little sleep. And the mattress you choose matters more than you might think. Maybe your current mattress is getting old, starting to sag. Maybe it's just not the right fit for you, your body type, or your sleeping style. Well, the wrong mattress can leave you sore, restless, and running on empty. But GhostBed is here to help. With GhostBed, you can choose from a full collection of mattresses designed for every sleeping style. Every GhostBed mattress includes their exclusive ProCore technology to give extra support where your body is the heaviest, keeping your spine aligned and relieving back pain. And in proven cooling features, you got a mattress that keeps you comfortable all night. You can also choose between all foam or hybrid designs, so you can really find your perfect match. Not sure where to start? Well, take GhostBed's mattress quiz. It is fast, gives you a reliable recommendation, and once your mattress arrives, you'll have a 101-night sleep trial to make sure it's the right fit. Every ghost bed is built to last, backed by a 20 to 25-year warranty, and ships fast and free. Most orders arrive in 2 to 5 days. Right now, during Ghost Bed's Black Friday sale, you can get 25% off already reduced prices for a limited time. Just go to ghostbed.com/fixit and use the promo code FIXIT, all caps, one word, at checkout. That's ghostbed.com/fixit with the promo code FIXIT. So upgrade your sleep with Ghost Bed, the makers of the coolest beds in the world. Some exclusions apply. See site for details. Having gone through this, what does Valley Forge mean to you?
So what happens is, and we don't set up these straw men to knock down, right? We're not saying, oh, we're not going to mention Betsy Ross. Well, we just don't know who made the first flag, so we don't mention Betsy Ross. But it's not a conscious decision to do that. Paul Revere doesn't say the redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming. He actually says the regulars are coming out. That's not as boring. I mean, it's more boring than it would be, but it's what happened. Nobody said don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes on Bunker Hill, which was actually on Breed's Hill, right? So there's all of that. So Valley Forge represents to us this sort of trope of how desperate it was. But let me just say, it's the fifth largest city in the new United States for a time. People are dying of disease and starvation. There are many languages. There's English, there's German, there's French. There are many African tongues, and there are many native tongues there. And all of them are fighting for the side. There's so much suffering. I think in February, they lose 2,000 people. And in fact, Tom Hanks reads, I said to him when he came in, you're not George Washington. Everybody will just never hear anything that Washington had to say. And so we gave him 14 quotes, maybe 10 different people, and every single one is in, including 2 by Albigence Waldo, who is a doctor at Valley Forge. And it's so beautiful reflections. Here comes a soldier, and you see people trudging through the snow. And then he witnesses the death of a Native American warrior and has to say that his journey's over, but nobody had fought more bravely than he had. And so I think what Valley Forge does, it's time to, people always complain in our divided, dialectical, preoccupied world that, oh, you're taking away my history. No, we're not. We're just pulling back, and we're just saying there are a lot more people here than you think. And the diversity of the variety, as Christopher Brown says at the opening of the film, is just so stunning. And the idea that we came together is so stunning. It's not because it was one kind of people believing one kind of thing, worshiping one kind of God that made it happen. It was because people did what people don't usually do. We're not subjects anymore, and we're going to try to figure out how to get along. We're going to be in pursuit of happiness, which is not wealth and riches. It's lifelong learning. That's what they meant. And that in order, if you live a life of that pursuit of knowledge, you have the possibility of being virtue. And if you're virtuous, then you earn the highest honor of the land, which is to be a citizen. And right now we take all this stuff for granted. We forget all this stuff. We're like, oh, somebody else can vote for me. And then every once in a while you suddenly feel like, wow, it really does matter. And it really does matter to listen that what we were inventing was not a dialectic. It was saying, I need to listen to you. I have to understand that politics is the story of compromise and the half loaf. You're not going to get everything. And right now we live in a time where it's my way or the highway. And we make up stuff, right? And we spend way too much time describing that stuff is made up and doing very little, as we tried to do over the 10 years, of just saying, no, here are the facts. And we've not just double checked them, we've triple checked them. And I'll give you an example. There's a line somewhere where it says 16 something. It doesn't matter. 16 ships, 16 dead, 16 months. And we've got a footnote in our script, and there are 3 scholars who believe that. And then we learn of a 4th scholar who is not quite sure at 16. So we've scrambled. Peter Coyote has gone home. We find somewhere in a word search, perhaps. We copy that word from somewhere in the film or somewhere in something he's read that may no longer be in the film, export it and put perhaps 16, and then we can sleep. Now, that's the kind of fact checking that just doesn't take place anymore, right? But we do it.
Deeply appreciate it.
And so inevitably we'll make a mistake. I'll get a letter after the thing that you said this, and it's not Thursday, it's late Wednesday night. I want to be corrected. But we've endeavored over 10 years to get this right when we live in an environment where people just make stuff up all the time and just pass it off, and people go down rabbit holes and do terrible things to themselves, imprison themselves with falsehoods, and sometimes do terrible things to other people based on the snowballing effect that takes place with this disinformation. So if you can set a table, John, C-SPAN, they've got a thing called Washington Journal where in the morning they have people calling in, and they do the morning newspaper, and they've got a Democratic line, call this number, and a Republican line, call this number, and an independent line. And I've been on it before, and you're always having to negotiate, watch that, that brick being thrown, that tomato being thrown, or this thing. Sarah Batzon, my co-director, and I were on last week, and everybody prefaced their question, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, with, "We really love your stuff," right? And then they asked the question. And I just thought, for this one moment, I thought, wow, we can set a table around which people can come, and we can go back to our origin story and perhaps reinvest ourselves in what the original purpose of this experiment was, the most important revolution in the history of the world.
That's the hope, and I think that's the larger virtue of your work, and it's why I believe so deeply in applied history as a way of cutting through the partisanship. I do think it does, it can, and it needs to. I want to bring us to the Declaration and the way that the founders drew on history to understand they were doing something audacious, something that democracy had failed before. But there are some lines of the Declaration beyond the iconic first line that have been circulating, have some new resonance. These were sort of the complaints of the king, rooted in facts. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislators, for cutting off trade with all parts of the world, for depriving us in many cases the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretend offenses. Now, history doesn't repeat, but sometimes it rhymes. But the echoes of this people are picking up on. Talk about the applicability of those lines to our time and the way that the founders were so focused on not having kings, on ensuring as much as we could that we could stop the rise of a tyrant.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I think one of our disciplines that we've always had, not just with this film, with any film, is that we are aware of what Mark Twain is supposed to have said, that history doesn't repeat itself, which of course it doesn't. No event has happened twice, but it rhymes. And those rhymes are present. We began this when Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency. There's a German general's wife who worries as she's making the perilous Atlantic crossing to join her husband that she's heard that Americans eat cats. If the film had come out last fall, people would go, "Oh, Ken, you did that. You put that in." It'd been in there for years before the Springfield, Ohio stuff became the insane conversation of October of 2024. There are lots of rhymes, and you have to just let them go and just say, this is what it is. A standing army is a huge, big deal to the colonists and then to the new United States. Remember, General Gage had ordered from Halifax, Nova Scotia, many ships to come to Boston, not to protect it, but to police it. And that's where the revolution starts because of that, the standing army. And all of those things you say, human nature doesn't change. That's going to happen. And I think we may be able to sort out our own confusions about the present moment by going back and revisiting, regardless of what political perspective you might own or share or believe you own or believe you share. And that is really important to qualify it in that way. And so I think by telling a complex story that isn't completely dependent on that binary 1 and a 0, yes and a no, wrong, right, good, bad. You understand the complexity of a George Washington. You understand that the Declaration is this extraordinary work of poetry, and then a list of 18 complaints, usurpations about it. And the last one is terrifying about, he has, inspired insurrections, meaning slave insurrections, and he has engaged the merciless Indian savages whose only known form of welfare is the destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. It's just literally a document of fear, but it rhymes with us today. We understand the underpinning of our republic is based on some pretty basic things. And so I think that going back and understanding the complexities of that help us. And let's also then go, there's poetry at the beginning and there's poetry at the end, complaints in the middle. The last line is, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes,
and our sacred
honor. Now think about it. I hope questions arise. I know it has in me over, like, let's be honest. What would I be? Would I be a loyalist? Would I be a patriot? Would I be willing to fight for a cause of a completely unknown idea? Would I be willing to die for that? Would I be willing to kill for that? George Washington may have been the richest man in the country, and he was sacrificing his, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin didn't fire a gun in anger, but George Washington did. And he risked his life, and he risked obviously his fortune, which may have been one of the largest, if not the largest fortunes in the country. We can leave the inscrutable sacred honor to another moment, another conversation, maybe this one, but just think about what they did on an idea that it was completely untested, with zero chance of success at Lexington Green on April 19, 1775, zero. And they did it. And so they're drawing on the Enlightenment, which is coming out of the Renaissance. They're drawing on French philosophers and the Scottish Enlightenment. They're going back to antiquity and drawing on Seneca and others. They're talking about virtue. That's the free electron word that we don't say as narration in our film, but is said so many times. Adams is anxious. Is there too much avarice and ambition, too much lust for profit? Is there not enough virtue that we can sustain this thing? It's what they wanted, virtue.
That's what I want to dig in on. Actually, let's dig in on our sacred honor.
Yeah.
This is the right conversation to have that.
It is indeed.
Because they did understand that virtue was essential to the success of democracy. Character is something they talked about a lot and tried to not just talk about, but live. And honor, presumably, is the consequence of your character. How do you understand their focus on virtue, character, and honor at a time when those virtues do not seem to be the coin of our realm in terms of our leadership, and how we rekindle that? Not in a way that seems distant and, puffed up, but just understanding that we're only as good as our honor.
Yeah, it's really important. And I think that particularly in an age of disinformation and misinformation, conscious and unconscious, it becomes more critical. I also think that many people listening to us will go, but yeah, these guys owned other human beings. What, come on. And that's a really important thing to point out too. We're not looking for perfection here. We don't want to soft sell the problems with what's going on, even among some of the most important founders. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson owned hundreds of human beings. Slavery was legal from New Hampshire to Georgia. We have to find a place in our understanding of the past where we can understand the good stuff and not, with our revisionism, be so unforgiving that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We lament today that there are no heroes, but the Greeks have told us for centuries, millennia, that heroism is not perfection. It's actually a negotiation within a person between their strengths and their weaknesses. And sometimes it's not a negotiation, it's a war. Achilles has his heel and his hubris to go along with his great strengths. And so I think when we take the past and understand it, then it gives us a guide to the present. What is it that we share in common? Where are the places where we can come together? One of the places that we share is this history. And maybe people are going to say, well, my history is different than yours because I think it's only blood and soil and whatever. But most people are, I mean, I had a 3-hour conversation, almost 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan in June. And he just went, wow, I didn't know that.
Right.
You know, wow, I didn't know that. And David McCullough once said to me, the late historian, said a couple of things. One was good history is thinking it might not turn out the way you know it did. You know, so by the end of the 5th episode, even though the French are in and we're going to win and we're going to win because we're alive and we know we won. When Charleston falls and Georgia goes into British hands and Washington's going, and you have to remember, Washington didn't know how it was going to turn out. He didn't even know he was George Washington. And, he's despairing at the end of episode 5. And I'm going, me too. Maybe it's not. And I've had letters from people. You mentioned the Civil War series that I produced, that came out 35 years ago. And, I get letters all the time from people who saying, I went into the last episode in Ford's Theater thinking this time the gun is going to jam. And that means, yes, because I felt that all during editing, like this time, when we were mixing it, we stopped just before we laid in the sound effects of the gunshot. We just stopped. And though the mix, as you know, is so expensive, we just sat there and cried because for a few minutes we'd kept Abraham Lincoln alive, and then we backed up, we laid in the sound and went home for Christmas and the film was done. But that's what it is. The other one that McCullough told me is something Harry Truman said, which is the only thing that's really new is the history you don't know. And I think there is, particularly with the revolution, particularly now, particularly as we approach the 250th, a place where the revolution could help put the us back in the U.S.
Yeah, that is obviously, even though you began this so long ago, the hope, the promise. I want to pick up on something you said, and I love that Harry Truman quote. But having begun this journey on PBS with multi-series documentaries with the story of the Civil War, going back now to the Revolution. In some ways, it's a prequel. It's a civil war, as you say.
Yeah, no, it is.
Can you see the tragic inevitability of the Civil War because of the core contradiction of slavery? Is
of
that
course. And
haunting the conversation?
Oh, it's really wonderful. And Bernard Valen, the late historian, we interviewed him when he was 98, all his marbles, and he died at 101 or 102. And we're worked on this long enough. He's alive in our film. And we'd use this bite in a film we'd done in Benjamin Franklin. It's one of the few times where I'd ever taken a bite from another film and put it in this. He said, before the revolution, people didn't talk about slavery, right? I mean, there were some people who spoke to its evils and were very articulate about it, but nobody talked about it. Once the revolution happened, that's all they talked about. And so there's a 19th century commentator named John J. Chapman, where he said there was never a moment during the deliberations of the Constitutional Convention where slavery was not a sleeping serpent. It lay underneath the table. Thereafter, slavery was not always on everyone's tongue, but certainly on their minds. And so what happens is when you begin to articulate these natural rights, right? You can't help but notice the hypocrisy of owning people or complaining that what the British are doing are enslaving us. I mean, Washington himself says, and they are treating us no different than those we hold in chattel slavery, right? So you go, but George, But George. Please, yeah. And so it opens the door. And if you articulate these natural rights, as I said before, it's over. It's over. It's going to take a while, but it's over. And so the second the revolution begins, what we call our Civil War, which is more accurately a sectional war between parts of the country, North and South. Civil wars mean lots of civilian deaths, and there are not that many civilian deaths except in Missouri and in eastern bleeding Kansas. Two civilians die in the greatest battle in North America, Gettysburg. Two people. So this is not about killing civilians, but there are a lot of civilian deaths, particularly in New Jersey and South Carolina in our revolution. It's a civil war. And maybe, as some people have suggested, our civil war is a revolution. It does produce the 2.0 of the Declaration, the Gettysburg Address.
It's the second founding.
In which he says, we really do believe that all men are created. It's the first sentences. He's going, and nobody talks 80 and 7 years. He's just asking you to think about the number 87 in a different way. That's all. It's just it's a rhetorical device to say, do I have your attention here? 7 years ago is a way to say, now pay attention to what I'm about to say.
You're drawing distinctions between civil wars and sectional wars and the second founding and this constant need for us to make the old stories new. But I wonder how this story, against the threat of political violence, which some people try to use as a catalyst for change, how you contextualize that within the story of our nation and draw a distinction between political violence and domestic debates, which is unacceptable, and this core story that many of our advances have been forged in war.
Yeah, well, I think, we were pressing a Vietnam Marine American to talk about what he did. He had a chest full of, fruit salad and a few pieces short of a Congressional Medal of Honor, but reticent, didn't want to talk about it. And finally just said, look, it's the history of the world, meaning violence. And so to me, the Civil War series came out in September of 1990. It was a month after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And Americans got really excited. We hadn't been in a war in a long time, and we got like 85% of the American population was very excited to go to war. And when the series came out, that number dropped by 25%, which is the best review I've ever had. I think when you make films about war, you have to remind them how just people, yourself, about how horrible they are. We call the Second World War, which is the greatest cataclysm in human history that killed 60 million people, the good war. And we do it, we know why, because of the ambiguity of Korea and the even greater ambiguity and dissonance around Vietnam. But it's not a good war. As our first chapter of that series is called A Necessary War. Maybe there's some times where you do have to pick up and say, we're going to stop this insanity. And that's what happened. But it's horrible, John. It is really bad. There's a line in a beautiful archive, and it's just this. You see this woman's name, Rebecca Tanner, and you pan across, and it says "lost 5 sons." So this is Mrs. Sullivan in the Second World War, whose sons are
right.
That gives us Saving Private Ryan and the War Department's desire to split people up. Rebecca Tanner is a Native American woman, a Mohegan, I assume, from Connecticut. So when you talk about suffering, who suffered more than Rebecca Tanner, losing 5 sons to the Patriot cause, a cause that was in large measure about ensuring that us and nobody else, not the Brits, not the Spanish, not the French, get to take her people's land.
In the few minutes we have left, I want to hit a couple of quick things. One's a big topic, and then a lightning round for you. We're entering the America 250, and obviously PBS has been cut, but the American Experience, which is you associated with you, but though you've never directly contributed to it, has been effectively defunded. It raises a question about our increased need to tell our stories. How have those cuts affect our ability to talk about our history, and then how can we counteract it?
Yeah, so it's a big deal. They killed the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Incredibly short-sighted. It'll hurt mostly rural communities. Maybe that's their intention. There'll be news deserts. Nobody will be covering the school board or the city council meeting. They'll miss not only the children's and primetime programming, but they'll miss Homeland Security stuff, continuing education, Classrooms of the Air, warning stuff that comes from the PBS signal. We've been hit, but we'll recover. I'm worried about somebody who's coming up right now that has a lot of talent that's not going to get a grant to do that. The American experience has been put consciously on hiatus for a while. It will be revitalized. It's got an incredible back catalog that can help remind us about what it is. It's not all doom and gloom. PBS has not been cut. It will take a hit. It's had to lay off lots of people at the national level as a kind of protective measure to try to get leaner as we face these things. But and ironically, one of the next films we're working on is a history of LBJ and the Great Society. One of the contributions, besides the big ones on civil rights and voting rights and Medicare and Medicaid, is the Public Broadcasting Act and the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. Hundreds of human beings who diligently paid most of the money to those rural stations, to the many stations. I know PBS, not NPR, 338 affiliates, the largest network in the country. That is now gone, and we'll have to figure out how to get by without it. But we'll be telling our stories, and I think I really hope that the Revolutionary series, not for us as filmmakers, but just for us as citizens, has a chance to sort of go back and strip away what Maya Jasanoff said, kind of unreal aspect about the revolution. It seems too distant. They can't be like us. Why are they have buckles on their shoes and stockings and breeches and powdered wigs? But they are exactly like us, and all the quantities of venality as well as virtue obtain then as they do now. And, we need to talk about virtue more.
We do. And that brings me to my final question for you, which is, what is I have said publicly many times, and I've told you that as far as I'm concerned, I think that every school should show a couple of core Ken Burns films, and that would be suitable for giving us a common and inspirational conversation about our history. But barring that self-promotional answer, what is your preferred prescription for reviving civics education, which has been cut for close to 50 years now?
Well, I think it's just that. You just have to make people aware that it isn't just 100 senators and 435 representatives and 3 branches of government, though God knows even that's decayed as a result of the absence for 2 or 3 generations of civic education. We have to get back. Civics is kind of a dirty word. So, for many people, it feels like castor oil. So I would substitute story, to tell our stories and begin to understand. I live in a tiny town in New Hampshire. We have wide variety of people there and political viewpoints. And we come together to figure out whether we want to buy a new fire truck, or we want to do this with the schools or that with the library. I hope that we begin to understand that one of the lessons is about citizenship and civic engagement and getting involved at whatever level that you can. I mean, my youngest daughter announced to me the other day that she wanted to become a politician and run for office. I don't want to be president, but I want to help people. So I think I need to go to law school and then help in a community. I said, well, that's the way Barack Obama did it. You go into a community and all of a sudden you're pretty good at it. I thought, God bless her. That's a really good thing. Now I have to keep working to pay for law school, which is a small price to pay for the continuation of our republic.
Indeed. Ken Burns, thank you for your work, for your inspiration, and for joining us on How to Fix It.
Thank you, John. Great to be with you.